Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at life in the early church, Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47. Acts chapter 2 started off with the Pentecost event. The Spirit came and tongues as of fire, and they began to speak in other languages. Then Peter gets up and explains to the crowd that has gathered what it is that's taking place. He connects it to a prophecy from the book of Joel, the Old Testament book of Joel, chapter 2. And he follows that up, goes right into a sermon that culminates in a call to repentance. And we read, in fact, we're going to pick up and we're going to see that 3,000 come to believe and are baptized. And now we come to verses 42 through 47, and we're going to see the spiritual life of that early church. So we left off chapter 2, verse 41. So then those who had received his word were baptized, and that day there were added about 3,000 souls. Now, when we say 3,000 souls, we mean 3,000 people. Notice soul is just another word for person. We're going to see that again a little bit later here. It has been argued by some 3,000, that had to be way too many. How could they possibly all get baptized? And it was very simple. You're looking at a picture here of the Temple Mount, and you see over on the right the south side of the Temple Mount with those gates, and beyond those are stairways that would take you up to the Temple Mount. But if you actually go there, and here's a picture just from that south area of the Temple Mount, you can see the steps in the distance. But notice other steps with these little, what look like cubicles. These are known as mikvot. Mikvah is singular, the oat is feminine plural. A mikvah is a ceremonial washing pool. And there are literally bunches of these pools. Here we're looking at the south side of the Temple Mount. If we go over to the north side of the Temple Mount, actually, it's a bit away from the temple, a short walk. You have the Pool of Bethesda. This is a place where remember, Jesus had healed the lame man who was waiting for the moving of the waters. And there were all sorts of pools here and terraces, and it was a large place. And then you could also go to the south side of Jerusalem, even further south from the Temple Mount, the Pool of Siloam. Remember how Jesus tells a blind man, "Go wash in the Pool of Siloam." Well, he came here. Now there's no water in it today. Today it's dried. Although they have to divert the water, or else it would fill up, because the water that fed this comes through Hezekiah's tunnel all the way down to this pool, and so there were plenty of water sources. Now, which one of these were used for these baptisms? We're not told. It might have been that they were all in use. 3,000 is quite a number of people that were being baptized on that day. Verse 42, they were continually devoting themselves, and notice the four things: to the apostles' teaching, and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. And these can serve almost as a 4-point outline of things to do as a new Christian, to devote yourself to the teaching of the Word. Now, the Word hadn't been written yet. They had the Old Testament scriptures, the New Testament, none of it had yet been written. It was going to be, but right now, what would eventually make it into the New Testament consists of the apostles' teachings. We would say today Bible study and fellowship. That is, sharing things in common. We're going to see this focus in just a few verses, but the fellowship, the sharing in common of between believers, the breaking of bread. I think that means eating together, but it also is sort of a shorthand to breaking bread and drinking the wine. It points to the Lord's Supper. You say, well, which were they doing? Were they eating together, or were they observing the Lord's Supper? And my answer would be yes. That they were probably doing both, and to prayer. Now, notice that prayer comes last, and yet if we look at 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 16, Paul asks the question, is not the cup of blessing which we bless a sharing in the blood of Christ? Is not the bread which we break, remember the breaking of bread, a sharing in the body of Christ? So he links that term to refer to the Lord's Supper. I think they were eating, but they were also remembering and they were worshiping and they were partaking in that ceremony that Jesus had given them to remember and to actually be a part of his death, burial, and resurrection. Acts chapter 1, verse 14. Notice here in verse 42, they were continually devoting themselves. Um, Notice how that is echoed from Acts 1:14 prior to the ascension of Jesus, actually after the ascension, but prior to the Pentecost experience. These were all with one mind, continually devoting themselves. And notice how prayer is mentioned there. To prayer along with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and with his brothers. They had been waiting for the Spirit to come, and now it had come, and the prayer continues. And notice added to that is the apostles' teaching and the fellowship and the breaking of bread. Verse 43, everyone kept feeling a sense of awe. Now, that phrase there, I'm going to get just a little technical here. The Greek text, gineta de passa suke phobos. Um, and if I wanted to be really, really almost like ultra literal, and that's not necessarily a good thing when you do a translation because sometimes you can miss the actual meaning. I might render it, but fear was or came about on or was coming about on each soul. Remember how I said that soul can just stand for the person, and I think that's the case here. The King James translates this, and fear came upon every soul. Um, where like I said, can everyone is the same thing as every soul. So that's an okay translation. But notice how the New American Standard translates that a sense of awe as opposed to fear. Well, the Greek word phobos can have that idea of something that is awe-inspiring, but really it's the basic word for fear. And I'm not sure that we should depart from that. And so here I'm going to actually back up the old King James version on this, and say that perhaps they should not have dispensed with that idea of fear. Now, this wasn't a fear that made people run away, not like a fear where you're running from a bully or a monster or something like that. But no, there was something about this new faith, these miracles that had taken place. Notice many wonders and signs were taking place. There was something about that that instilled, yes, awe, yes, wonder, but maybe also just a little bit of fear. It reminds me of that time that Jesus was in the boat with his apostles, and the storm comes up, and he's asleep in the boat, and they're actually afraid because of the storm. I don't know if they could swim that well, and they're out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, and it's rather large, and so they wake up Jesus, and he turns to the wind and the waves, and he says, "Quiet!" And it gets quiet. And then we read, and then they were greatly afraid. Phobos, they were afraid. Um, because now they didn't try to jump out of the boat and leave Jesus, but they asked the question, what kind of person is this? And there's just a little bit of fear and trepidation, and that Jesus was not just a normal person. And here, likewise, they have this sense of fear because they realize we're not just playing games at religion. God is real, and He is able to act in a real way, and He's able to do real things. And prayer really works, and we should not take God for granted. Now, notice also many wonders and signs were taking place through the apostles, and that's echoed in what had been said earlier in this chapter, where Joel's prophecy had been quoted by Peter, and part of that quotation where Joel says, "I will grant wonders." Of course, it's God who's speaking in Joel's prophecy. "I will grant wonders in the sky above and signs on the earth below." So wonders and signs, and they were now taking place. And then Peter had gone on to describe the ministry of Jesus, a man attested to you by God with miracles and wonders and signs. And here they are, the wonders and signs. In other words, the thing that Jesus had done, they are doing those things too. Verse 44, and all those who had believed were together and had all things in common. Now we have that explained a bit more in verse 45. And they began selling their property and possessions and were sharing them with all as anyone might have need. Now that doesn't mean everybody sold everything they had immediately, but as a need came up, they would dip into their savings or whatever. And if they didn't have it in actual savings, then they might take this property or that property and sell it, especially those that had it. Now, if you didn't have property, you couldn't sell it. But if you had something, then you might sell it and take the proceeds to meet the specific needs. Notice, as anyone might have need. And so notice the fellowship that they had extended to a financial fellowship. As they did this, notice when it says they had all things in common, the word for fellowship is koinonia. The word for in common is koinos. It was a fellowship of finances, a fellowship of funds. Verse 46, day by day, and notice continuing with one mind in the temple. And this was taking place on a regular basis. This wasn't just a single act, but this continues. It was a continuing action. And they were both in the temple and breaking bread from house to house. So the temple would be a place where they could all come together. After all, the church had just grown to 3,000, and we're going to see it doesn't stop there. So they were both in the temple. That's where they could meet all together. And then in smaller groups, breaking bread from house to house, they were taking their meals together with gladness and sincerity of heart. Notice the breaking bread reminds us of the Lord's Supper, but there were meals involved too. They were taking their meals together with gladness and sincerity of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. So notice that there were two responses. First of all, they're praising God, but the people look at that and people gravitate to what they are doing. And notice, you see, last part of verse 47, and the Lord was adding to their number. And again, you have that day by day. It wasn't just on Sundays, it was continuing. The Lord was adding to their number day by day those who were being saved. Now, finally, I want to just look at the section we've just seen, and I want you to see the outline for it, where we started off in verse 41. They were added 3,000 souls, and then you have that they were continually teaching and fellowship and breaking of bread and prayer. Those sort of four items, four things that's good for Christians to do. We often tell a new Christian, here are the four things that you ought to do. But this isn't just for new Christians. I think this is for all Christians. And then the pivotal point in this entire section is that financial commitment that they had, where they had all things in common, and there was both selling and sharing, and it reached down to their finances to meet the needs of those who were needy. Next, we have again, notice we saw before, continue in verse 42, teaching, fellowship, breaking bread, prayer. Now in verse 46, it's daily in the temple, breaking bread, going house to house, having their meals together. So it's repeating at least some of those elements. And we started off where there were added 3,000 souls, and finally we see that the Lord was adding to their number day by day. It was continuing to grow. So it started at 3,000. But it doesn't stop there, it continues to grow. But notice how the central point in this, sort of the pivotal central focus, is how they had things in common and how it affected their use of their possessions, their money, their property, and they were committed to one another, even to the point of a financial commitment. I think that the scriptures call us to be committed to one another, even to the point where it turns to financial commitment.